So I don't care what your technology is. If somebody wants to buy it, you're my favorite, right? You are my favorite. By wants to buy it, that should be real. That's not necessarily an MOU or an LOI or any of these things. That's like a real business contract, whether it's not fixed price, whatever it is. That's a contract for purchase of something. Power purchase agreements are moving in that direction, but that takes a lot of risk out of the customer's association with the nuclear technology.
Just because the facts are A, if the narrative is B and everyone believes the narrative, then B is what matters. But it's our job in our industry to speak up proudly, soberly, and to engage people in this dialogue. Those 2.5 billion people that are in energy poverty, they need us.
America cannot meet this threat alone.
If there is a single country,
of course, the world cannot meet it without America,
that is willing to
we're going to need you, the next generation, to finish the
overhaul
job.
nuclear regulation
We need scientists to design new
and
fuels.
focus on net public
We
benefit
need engineers to invent new technologies. We
over absurd levels of radiation
need
protection,
entrepreneurs to sell those technologies.
then we will march towards this.
We need workers to operate assembly lines that hum with high-tech, zero-carbon
We have
components.
unlimited prosperity for all humans.
We need diplomats and businessmen and women and Peace Corps volunteers to help developing nations skip past the dirty phase of development and transition to sustainable sources of energy. In other words, we need you.
Welcome to another episode of the Fire to Fission podcast, where we talk about energy-dense fuels and how they can improve human lives. Today, we're joined by one of my good friends, one of my favorite people in industry, Brett Rampal. Brett is the Senior Director of Nuclear and Power Strategy at Veriton, and I am stoked to talk to Brett today. Brett, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Mark. It's really good to chat with you, as always. I'm super excited to be here, and I am stoked, hyped, any 90s excited word we could throw out there. It's going to be a wicked good time now, right?
Showing our millennial age and upbringing.
I'll take it.
To our word choice.
I'll take it.
I love it. Cool, man. We know the drill. Getting background on guest. But I'm really excited for this conversation. We're gonna cover a bunch of topics. This episode may be longer than some of our previous episodes, and we've made sure to block out time. You and I are both, not socially driven at the start of the new year, and so Friday afternoon that we're recording this, we get all the free time in the world. So bear with us, listeners. We're gonna be covering a lot. So, Brett, last time I saw you was after your guys' party, the Veriton holiday party in Houston, and we stayed out quite a while after that, just BSing about the industry.
Yeah, it was great. I'm really happy that you could join us. Veriton party is always a good time. So to any of your listeners that have gotten an invite before and may not have joined us, shame on you. But no, it was great.
It's very fun.
No, I'm glad you say that. It was great to spend that time with you. Veriton, we love to work with our community, but we also love to enjoy our community. And our community tends to be full of thoughtful, enjoyable people. And so that makes for great events. So we're, our kind of model is all about finding people asking interesting questions about energy, getting them together, helping them find answers any way we can, and hopefully using them to help others find answers, right? And so it's just a really great sort of environment, and why not get everybody together at least a couple of times a year for something fun, because we work so hard.
Absolutely. For those that aren't on that invite list, Phil, it is I think an invite only event, so you got to figure out how to get on the list. But once you're on it, it's a fantastic event to attend. I agree. You guys do a great job of connecting awesome people in the industry. So we'll talk more about Veriton in a bit. Brett, I want to zoom back a little bit and talk kind of about your background. Pretend like you just met me. We're at one of these parties. What would be your pitch for kind of who you are, what you do?
Sure. Well, I would say I'm a nuclear energy expert with a technical policy and now sort of investment kind of experience base. And in the nuclear world, it's kind of hard to find opportunities to branch out and get so much exposure. And so I've been really lucky, and that offers me I'd like to think a unique and useful perspective to folks.
Yeah, I agree. And I always love your perspective. All of our conversations are interesting. So, um, how did you get your start, Brett? Where did you start?
So I am a nuclear engineer by training, excuse me, and trade. I got my start at the University of Florida. I never really knew that I wanted to do nuclear engineering. I knew I wanted to do science and technology and math. That's all that excited me growing up. You could see for those watching, you could see the spaceman in the Norman Rockwell painting behind me, right? And at the time I went to Florida, they had two top 10 engineering schools. One was nuclear and one was materials. And my brother was in materials engineering. So that was strike number one over there. Right. And, my older brother, he was 2 years ahead of me. You never want to follow directly in their footsteps. And then I looked in the book that told you everything. And it was, nuclear is a lot of science and math and a lot of physics and calculus and differential equations. Then I looked at materials and it was a lot of chemistry and organic chemistry, and I hated chemistry. And I was like, oh no. And we walked out of preview, the orientation at Florida, and you walk out and the nuclear building is kind of directly in front of you and the materials building is to your left. And then over the nuclear building is an engineering building, and then the football stadium. And so I said to my mother when we walked out, I was like, look, the nuclear building is closer to the football stadium. And she was like, this is not the way you decide your major. This can't be. And I was like, Mom, that's three strikes. And it was one of the best decisions I ever made, even if it was kind of a wacky, weird way to do it. And, a year later, with very little sort of exposure to anything nuclear growing up besides, The Simpsons. And everybody loves to point to The Simpsons as like a negative thing, but I guess I'm the weirdo growing up that was like, oh yeah, that's how I learned about nuclear. That sounded interesting. If Homer Simpson can do it, I can do it, right? That was kind of what I took from The Simpsons. And I knew nothing. And in my first classes, one professor, two professors dispelled all myths, everything I heard. And I mentioned this to somebody else the other day. I was immediately indoctrinated. And sometimes indoctrination can be good when it's fact-based and, reasonable and the right sort of thing. I'm not an advocate for any of your listeners to get involved in cults by any means or anything, but, there is certainly a cult of nuclear fission. And, that's one of the healthier ones, I would say, out there. Right. So for me, it was immediate. It was not all positive. I failed in my college classes. I, came from a place with lots of great education and great experience, and everything was super easy. And nuclear is rigorous and hard. And the people that I went to school with are, some of the smartest people I will ever meet or interact with in the world. And then I went and met the people that, from other universities and that worked in the workplace in nuclear spaces when I entered the workplace. And they're even more impressive. So, I, as a young person, experienced a lot of challenges and was lucky to overcome those. I graduated. I was working for General Electric Hitachi, supporting the existing fleet while I was getting my master's degree. And then after that, I was lucky enough to get a job with Westinghouse Electric Company, where I spent 5 years supporting their side of the existing fleet. as a fuel engineer and core designer, and later the senior core designer and engineering project manager for the Dominion fleet of pressurized water reactors, Millstone, North Anna, and Surrey. And my career, of course, goes on from there. But that's kind of how I got my start, and it was a really, really great opportunity to get a great education, learn about nuclear in the what the real nuts and bolts of what is real, the realest nuclear in the United States, our existing fleet, despite any aims for and anyone's ambitions and my ambitions for some other opportunities for other new technologies, and really taught me a lot and put me in a position to be even more valuable today. So yeah, I really got very lucky along the way to fall into this, and have loved it a lot along that pathway.
Nice. That's awesome. I love the story about the football stadium. It's kind of funny how life takes you in interesting directions like that, and how such a seemingly innocuous decision, or something that might have not been very monumental, could influence a decision like that is very monumental for your life and your career. I've got kind of a similar experience with my major selection. I was at the first undergraduate university that I went to. I switched schools after a year, but when I was touring the campus, I wanted to do physics originally, and the dean of the mechanical engineering school ran into me accidentally. He's like, "Oh, you're a new student? What are you studying?" And I was like, "I'm gonna do physics." And he's like, "Really? Have you considered engineering?" And I was like, "Well, I don't know." And he's like, "I mean, we basically do everything that the physics people do. We just make a lot more money." And I was like, "Maybe I'll study engineering. We'll see."
Nuclear engineers, when I was at Florida, were the second highest paying graduating major in engineering at Florida, behind petroleum engineers. And I didn't, no offense. I have only learned a lot more about what petroleum engineering does and how interesting of an industry that can be. But as a 17-year-old kid, that didn't sound right for me. Right. So, yeah, I mean, economics, the science around engineering, it makes engineering its own cult as well, right?
It
I
is.
don't want this.
It's its own cult. You're the first to admit it's we're a club of people. Yeah, you're exactly. So, your GE Hitachi internship, where they've gone through 10 iterations of this BWR. Was it Gen 8, Gen 9 or something that
So I was lucky enough to start as an intern and then transition into a co-op and then a part-time employee while I was in grad school. And so that allowed me the opportunity to engage on multiple different things. So I started my career with GE working on some licensing work for the ESBWR, the original large new reactor version for GE large light water reactor version for GE. That's kind of been what that they have been talking about in my lifetime. And so that project essentially in a lot of ways is the analog to the AP1000, the GE version essentially of the large next generation of what we have in our fleets right now. And they were thinking about how to sell that, how does that, what customers would be interested in that. And that's really sort of a utility scale product. And so as the opportunities for utility demand growth and sort of the general downturn of things that happened around 2008, 2009, GE's stock when I started when I was in grad school, starting in 2007, was around 50, maybe 55. When I was leaving in 2009, I think it was 12 or 16 or something. And so, that's drastic challenges for the parent company to be facing. And at the same time, we had a fleet of nuclear utilities that were facing their own financial challenges that only became more, amplified and, led to closures and all sorts of things that even in 2007 and 2008, we weren't really anticipating, neither, some ways in possibility nor in speed. And so that led a lot to sort of GE thinking about how to change the products to be a new offering and essentially enter the SMR space. And I was neglectful and in mentioning before when I said, ESBWR was the main offering from GE during our lifetimes, because there was the ABWR before that. And that is the fastest constructed light water reactor in the history of the world. I believe at the Shoka site in Japan, that reactor was constructed in something like 39 or 38 months. And that with, enough power for, 800,000, 900,000 million homes. I'm sorry, I don't know the exact energy conversion from homes to in Japan. It's hard enough in America. And so that product was also being considered in places like South Texas Project in the United States, but it wasn't really being considered broadly. And so ESBWR was supposed to be the larger, more passive, more safe version of ABWR. Perhaps in hindsight and in retrospect, somebody might have said, well, why'd you spend all that money? You should have spent that money convincing people to just buy the ABWRs or build the ABWRs or do whatever. But hindsight is always 2020, and they were looking at different demand trends and their customers were asking for different things. And that led to them to try to make a product that answered those questions. And then interest rates, natural gas prices, Fukushima, all sorts of things came together to compound a giant whirlwind of story around why that was a poor decision on their part to kind of make this the product that they were really sort of pushing and driving. But again, I don't know a lot of rational or smart or real people or papers I could find from those days that would have said all of this and spelled out any of this or all of this and said, GE is doing wrong. This is what GE should do, And so we were all caught up in it. We all thought different things. And that's, time is the best educator, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah. And the ESBWR, that was their economically simplified or economic simplified.
So it technically, at some point, that was the acronym for it, but now it is acronym list and just is ESBWR because it's not really simplified.
They're like the predecessor of their current BWRX, right? Yeah, they took
ESBWR, and essentially when they were starting on that process to get to BWRX, they put a bunch of engineers in the room and they said, we want you to decrease the amount of material in this reactor, steel, concrete, all that sort of stuff, by 90%, while only decreasing the power output by a maximum of 80%. And by doing that, you automatically double the economic like you improve the economics by a factor of 2 right there and then. So they thought that would be very helpful in their design thinking and the development of BWRX. Of course, preliminary designs are preliminary designs. We've seen the BWRX design evolve a little bit recently, and we'll, see it evolve further. So the question is, what exactly will it look like when they're ready? Will they have achieved that sort of 80%, 90% ratio sort of thing? Will it even have mattered? Is ESBWR more expensive, less expensive than they thought it was? These are all questions that we won't really know until people really, really start doing the real hard work here, which is usually around construction.
Which, I mean, they're on path to do that, so that's exciting. We can dive more into, I mean, that GE Hitachi if we want, but I'm curious to learn kind of a little bit more about your experience. I mean, you were at Westinghouse and then kind of stepped through NuScale and did some contracting, I think, for deep isolation. Like, you've touched a lot of these entities that, certainly can be public or have had press releases. But just curious if you've got kind of stories or topics or, share with us a little bit of your experience.
Sure. Yeah. No. So I never like to speak, too much inside baseball in some of these companies, right? And everything. But all I will say is
We
that
don't have to sign NDAs with them. No, I'm just kidding.
right. All I will say is that I've had good and great experiences at all of these places and terrible, awful experiences at all of these places, just like you do at any job, right? These are jobs, more than anything.
They're paying you to be there.
Right. We didn't mention it before, or you didn't mention it before. I also spent 5 years leading the nuclear focus area and policy research area for the Clean Air Task Force, in addition to my now time at Veriton for several years. And so, I had a really awesome opportunity to learn about real nuclear and real nuclear technology at Westinghouse. Supporting the existing fleet and doing core design or safety analysis or any of the number of other really impactful and important jobs at utilities and vendors to support these teaches you so much. Teaches you so much about the plants. Teaches you so much, not just about your niche, but about the niche of the guy in the cubicle next to you, or even if you're remote, as I was for some of my time at Westinghouse and a lot of my time at NuScale and other places. The people you interact with, you cannot help but learn. And if you're going to be good nuclear engineer, learning should just be something you love and something that you want to embrace. And so at Westinghouse, as you learn more and as you become more knowledgeable, you can get to a place where you can get sort of non-standard qualified and you can do work essentially without methods and work that you just essentially make up on your own on the fly there, which is kind of a big deal to be thinking about, oh, hey, this nuclear reactor has operated for 30 or 40 years where they're having a challenge. They have come to their vendor or, that we're working in consultation with our customer to resolve a big problem, and nothing that anybody has ever done on any of the other sister plants or this plant for the last 40 years is useful to us or is the solution here. So we need you to apply your experience and your knowledge to help develop something informed based on all of those. As an example of this, one of my plants, I won't say which one, I've already kind of probably, revealed too much by even saying, it was one of my plants, but one of the plants I helped support had an issue with its measurements to predicted bias. Essentially, we would predict a lot of data around how the plant would operate, and it would then measure the plant would measure for startup and for general operations a lot of this data and compare it. And even sometimes, particularly for startup, the regulator would say to you, this is how close you have to be. If you're not this close between measurements and predictions, you cannot start up your reactor. You have to shut down your processes. You have to, all this. And that might be while you have 3,000 people on site getting ready to just having finished reloading fuel and you're getting ready to start back up. And, a plant could be 3, 5, 6, maybe even now today, $1 million a day in revenue lost every day. It's down to that utility. So yeah, having a bias can be challenging if it starts to get closer to those review and acceptance criteria. And one plant in the fleet always has to be worst. And that was one of my plants. And so as we were getting closer, it was a effort between me and my utility counterpart, a brilliant core designer as well, or excuse me, I should have said brilliant core designer. I wasn't talking about myself. I'm an idiot. He was very sharp. A brilliant core designer. And he and I working together were able to diagnose the issue, develop a pathway and a methodology for kind of improving the plant's predictions. I left before we got to see it installed on the next cycle and everything, but nobody ever called me to tell me everything was burning down and nothing was working right. And I hope that laid the groundwork for my replacement to have a good place to stand on and to then modify it and work with the counterpart of the plant to then further resolve future problems for that plant. And I never heard a story about X, Y, and Z plant having to extend its outage or not doing this or failing to meet review and acceptance criteria. And so that can be a very fun and empowering experience. That's one of the, really exciting things I did at Westinghouse. In line with that, also, I got to help roll out like a new code package. This doesn't sound exciting to you, but we do simulations and predictions, and those are regulatorily and federally, and the federal government and the NRC has to qualify a lot of these tools. So to roll out new prediction tools and everything is a big deal, and working with your customer to develop new methods with those new tools might have been the first time that anybody was doing that for that plant in 2 decades-ish and everything. So that sort of stuff can be few and far between, and I had a really unique and great opportunity to kind of jump in places, either because of the plants I was supporting, where I was located, or just what was going on at Westinghouse at the time. And then, so I left Westinghouse in 2014 and spent 3 years as a fuel engineer at NuScale Power. I supported their design certification application, which, has led to this talking point that NuScale likes to throw out there all the time about them being the only licensed reactor design in this country. A design certification is a tool to support the licensing of an actual project. So they are the first design certification for an SMR in this country. And it was a really interesting and fun experience to participate in that. I got fired from NuScale in 2017. And then after leaving NuScale, I spent 5 years working, as I said, for the Clean Air Task Force, which is a really amazing and unique way to kind of experience and learn about policy advocacy and our federal government and how to interact with stakeholders and policymakers, and to kind of be in the right place in the right time to experience this drastic sort of bipartisan and amazing growth in support for nuclear energy, which was a lot of what my job was focused on. So when I started at Clean Air Task Force, we were talking about tens of millions of dollars in support and a little bit of regulatory reform. And when I was leaving 5 years later, we're talking about billions of dollars in support, tech neutral tax credit, wide ranging reform of our tax codes to support, energy technologies of all different types. And so that is a really amazing sort of escalator to think that I had an opportunity to ride along with. And maybe I, polished the glass somewhere, or, turned a bolt or two somewhere along with, hundreds of thousands of other people. to make this new world that we are living in potentially possible.
That's awesome, man. That's I gotta say, one thing that I love about you, the self-deprecating humor is often a sign of intelligence, and you're obviously a very smart guy. And so every time you've got self-deprecating humor, like I got fired from New Scale, like just come out and with it. It's I love it. It's admirable. So
Well,
I got
a lot of people fear the failure, and they feel, and they fear, embracing the negative aspects of like their careers and their life or even their personalities. But if you can't learn from it, then it was definitely a mistake. If you can learn from it, it was never a mistake, right? And everything. So that's the way I like to look at things. And if somebody else can learn from my experience and, or not get fired, or I cannot get fired again, or any of those things, right? It's all about learning from and getting better along from. And, as on a personal note, I think this a lot comes from, I have God rest his soul, but I have a twin brother who unfortunately passed away from a fentanyl overdose 5 or 6 years ago. Amazing person. And he, but his addiction was very shameful, lots of shame. Shame is very challenging and is very difficult for anybody. And so I don't try to live a shameful life. I don't think anything is shameful. Live in the bright light, embrace what it is. I am kind of an idiot. And, I have met tons and tons of people sharper and smarter than me. And if I'm walking into those rooms thinking I'm smarter than all of these people, even if I may have more experience, or I may, perhaps come out with the better idea at the end, or who knows, right? I don't know what's going to happen in my life, but I'm just saying, you're never going to have that. You're never going to be in a good place to interact if you think you're the smartest person in the room and everything. So the wise man knows they're an idiot. I am an idiot.
I love it. Okay, let's skip ahead to your current position. So yeah, I mean you left Clean Air Task Force, you did some consulting, then found your way to Veriton. How'd you get hooked up with these guys, and what motivated you to go in this direction?
So I was super lucky. I was thinking about what was next for me at the end of my time at Clean Air Task Force, and mentioned to a bunch of colleagues that, I'm looking for opportunities. And I was very lucky that a colleague at the Nuclear Energy Institute ran into Maynard, my boss, my current boss at Veriton, our CEO and founder, and Jeff, my other boss and our COO, ran into them, and they essentially sat down and said, "We're starting something new. We're moving on from this great bank that we had founded and run for 20 years, and has just got acquired by another public bank. We're going to create something totally new in the energy space in terms of supporting traditional companies, industrials, utilities, manufacturers." And the NEI guys were like, "Great, that's awesome. Let us know how can we help." And they're like, and Maynard and Jeff responded, and they said, essentially, "We think nuclear is cool, but we know nothing about it. Can you help us? Do you think you could introduce us to somebody that we should be talking to?" I was very lucky that they introduced me to them. And I guess I was also, infinitely more lucky that they decided I was the type of person that worked at Veriton, and that we were the type of people that jived together. And so I got an opportunity to fall in very quickly into a lot of a new world for me. I know for you, Mark, some of this world is probably more your bread and butter, right? The, oil and gas, or the traditional energy, or the traditional industrials, but as a sort of electricity utility world and nuclear world kind of guy. My 2.5 years or so at Veriton so far have been so informative, so educational, and just so fun. The companies that we get to interact with, the questions they ask about nuclear or other technology are maybe some of the most impactful things I think could be that are going on in nuclear and broader energy discussions or activities right now anywhere in our country. So yeah, the only reason I managed to land at Veriton, luckily, is again because of the places I was and because I, essentially put a toe out and started looking and was, fishing for the next opportunity. So I used to run the American Nuclear Society's Young Members Group. It's a collection of 3,000 or so, maybe more, maybe less now about 3,000 nuclear engineers and nuclear energy professionals around this country under the 36 or younger. A lot of them would normally come up to me a lot of times and ask, how do I find the right opportunity in the nuclear industry? What should I do? How do I end? I don't know if I like my current job. And I always tell them, always be open to opportunities, always be looking. It's always good practice. And for years, I was very, very happy at Clean Air Task Force, and I had stopped looking. And so I was very lucky that I spent some time looking and found such great people to connect with. And now at Veriton, in addition to sort of our activities supporting our client and partner companies, we also have about $100 million investment fund that we use to make investments in all, energy opportunity, all sorts of energy focused companies that can hopefully really have an impact over the next 10 years or so. And as I said, it's about $100 million fund because it's targeted kind of at small scale investments to support companies that may be in that, valley of death, as they call it. This opportunity this place where their capital needs aren't really so drastic, but they may still be a little bit further away from revenue. It's hard to connect the dots on funding things, and that sort of world of capital is just a smaller sort of place. And so we're hopeful that we can be really impactful there. We haven't found a direct nuclear investment that we can make. I am really, really, I can't say too much. It's not public yet, but we will be making an investment, pretty soon, I believe, in a uranium focused company. And maybe even when this episode goes live, that might be, that might be new. That might be old news. But we'll see, so that's really cool for us. It's been great to learn a lot about companies in the world, and my colleagues have also used the fund and the engagement we've had with nuclear companies and other companies to expose themselves and learn so much more about the nuclear world at this point, to the point that I often joke with Maynard and Jeff, and I'm like, don't fire me now that you know so much and you're so smart about nuclear and everything. So now that you don't need me, because, rolling up your sleeves or being a smart financier or being a smart person that led or looked at, energy research at banks, those should be people that should be able to, when exposed to nuclear and nuclear companies and nuclear free, should be able to swim in these waters pretty quickly.
Yeah. That's fascinating. Our whole brand, Fire to Fission, right? It's like I was an oil and gas guy and then got curious about nuclear, and I've always kind of thought about it one direction like that, or directionally. And that they are very different communities, right? You go to these oil and gas conferences versus you go to a nuclear conference, and the energy is very different. So I hadn't really considered somebody like yourself that, was traditionally in the nuclear space and then gets exposed to, Veriton, especially like investment bank that has these heavy hitters, talking about Maynard's height is weight, right? But that are excellent in their profession and are very, very astute in the oil and gas space.
Well, I want a funny anecdote. My old boss's boss from my time at Westinghouse is Dr. Rita Baron-Wall, our former Assistant Secretary of Energy for the Office of Nuclear Energy at the Department of Energy. And we, stay in touch. And we were joking one time. We were at a Texas event together, and I believe I had just come out of a bunch of partner meetings at some oil and gas companies, and she had just gone and visited a bunch of oil and gas companies, and we're coming out of them. I think I had seen that she was going to be in the same office that we were in earlier in the day. So I was like, how was it? What did you think? What was going on? And she's like, Brett, it was like, they had like a car in their parking lot, in their lobby, and like all of these old, really cool, like, gasoline pumps, from like the 50s. And it was airy and beautiful, and people were smiling and happy and having a great time. And I was like, yeah, it's different, right? And she was like, yeah, it's really different. And I'm like, what does that? And she's like, what do you mean? What does that? And I'm like, profit, like profit does that. And even at the times that we were there and we were talking about this, a lot of the oil and gas companies were still coming out of this several decades of misery that they were in around profit and revenue, right? And everything. But it's, different mindsets, different thought processes. A lot of the nuclear industry and, places I worked and places I didn't work, and even the whole concept around SMRs and all these startup companies is because it's a beaten down, downtrodden, struggling place in a lot of ways. I was doing a focus group with some NGOs recently, and in that focus group, what the media group that was doing it asked questions around what is, how should we think about the nuclear industry doing this or doing that or saying this or saying that. And I stopped her, and when they came to me to answer that question, I was like, well, what is the nuclear industry? I'm going to need you to describe that to me and explain that, because I know there's a couple of vendors that wanted to build reactors that could never do it really successfully and now have lived on fuel and warranties and services businesses. And there's a bunch of utilities that do stuff that is nuclear related and have nuclear businesses, but their other aspects of their businesses are huge in comparison. And there's a whole other, sort of vendor and component and supply chain activities that are mostly the same as well. And none of this is connected. And there's no, even if you say that, the Nuclear Energy Institute is like the lobbying group for the, nuclear energy groups and nuclear utilities and everything, it's certainly not the American Petroleum Institute, right?
Not even,
not
not
even close. And I love the people at both.
I can talk about that specific dichotomy.
Right, and I love the people at both of those institutions, but API exists as large as it does to support a large, real industry, like with partners that kind of, collaborate together a lot, and the collaboration in the nuclear industry is getting better. It's, now things are leaning in more. People are we'll date. I'm sorry, Mark, we're dating ourselves, but I just saw today that there was an announcement from TVA and GE and Duke, and I think a third utility, around the fact that they're all collectively going in to bid for $800 million in federal grant money to support collectively driving down the risk on BWRX SMR projects for the United States, right? So those sort of collaborations and pathways and things in the nuclear industry, we hear it and we're like, wow, that's amazing. Why didn't other people think of this? And then you and I well know in the petroleum industry or the oil and gas industry or any, fossil fuel industry, people are doing collaborations and relationships and
it's a common business structure,
right,
that happens all the time.
right. And GE's fuel line is a joint venture between GE and Hitachi and Toshiba. It's called Global Nuclear Fuels. GE's nuclear business is an alliance between GE and Hitachi. So there are these things around underneath here, and people don't pay attention. Westinghouse bought combustion engineering. Westinghouse got the B. I believe Westinghouse merged the B&W nuclear division into it when both were owned by maybe it was BNFL, British Nuclear Fuels Limited, or maybe it was CBS. I think it was BNFL. But there have been some of those activities, but there hasn't been a lot of those activities until somewhat recently. You see the Brookfield and Cameco acquisition of Westinghouse, and people are like, wow, this is amazing, this is fantastic, huge deal, right? And everything. And I mean, Constellation is buying Calpine. That puts that deal to shame, right? And everything. We talked about it for 2 days, and now we're like, okay, yeah, Constellation buying Calpine makes sense, right? So real industries have real activities. They make sense. They're vibrant. They're successful. They ebb and flow. We don't have a bankruptcy and everybody loses their mind. We don't sue each other into oblivion, those sort of things, right? So that's kind of why it makes it challenging for people, that like myself before I came to Veriton, to really understand what this is all about. And I was even a guy that was exposed to a lot more than just the quote unquote nuclear industry, because I spent time working in NGOs and government. And did that make me better positioned? Think of oil and gas companies as they actually are? I don't know. I don't know if that's a real question I can answer here, right? But it's fascinating to come from the outside and kind of see this major, huge part of the global industry. And it's just like what I said earlier about like when I went to school and that one day of classes learned all this stuff about nuclear that I didn't know, and was like, why don't they talk about this, right? You learn so much about oil and gas that folks don't talk about and is not a part of the dialogues in mainstream. And you're like, why don't we talk about this more? And I'm not, you're not an apologist for fossil fuels and emissions. I'm not an apologist for fossil fuels and emissions. That's one of the things that people don't get here. Most people in the fossil fuel worlds or in the oil and gas worlds, one of their first and one of their leading tenets in their life that they'll say to you, yeah, we got to clean up. We got to clean up the methane. We got to do this. We got to do that, and everything. They get it. But the other dialogues around everything dominate rather than the rational ones. And it's, really fascinating to roll your sleeves up and learn more and see, companies think about, owning nuclear technology as oil and gas giants for the first time in decades. And that can only be good for everyone.
I agree. I totally agree. I want to continue on that discussion, but I want to circle back first to Veriton. So we talked a little bit about the fund that you guys have, the $100 million fund, and we already mentioned that you guys throw great Christmas parties. So got that covered. But what else does Veriton do? I mean, this boutique investment bank. What other kinds of things? I mean, you guys got a couple podcasts. Tell us about your other services.
Yeah, so I wouldn't call us a boutique investment bank at all. That would be where Maynard and Jeff and a lot of
legacy.
Right. That's where they came from. Which, I wish I had spent as much time as they did at a boutique investment bank of that caliber and scale, and what they managed to accomplish, because they accomplished great things. And I'm sure it was super rewarding to everybody involved. I'm not sure. I know it was super rewarding to everyone involved. And so what we do in addition to kind of look at, things through the lens of our investment fund is that we also, as I said, work with a lot of these traditional companies, industrials, utilities, manufacturers. They will, develop a relationship with us. That relationship will allow them to call on me if they have a nuclear question, call on my colleagues for broader market questions or other energy questions, call on us to do some analysis, call on us to attend meetings with them, work with them on some project they have internally. We like to think of ourselves in those sort of capacities as like outside the house, out of the house R&D, energy R&D, thinking about where it's going. And we can also be really helpful to them in making connections across our partners and clients, as well as the folks we meet otherwise. And otherwise, one of the vehicles we use to drive those networks and to inform our partners, inform our broader network, is our streaming shows and our podcasts that we do. Close of Business Tuesday is our flagship show, and it is fantastic. I have to say first, right? Of course,
I agree.
But
you're supposed to say that as an insider. I get to say that as a consumer. I think it's wonderful. I listen to it every week. It's awesome.
That's very kind of you. High praise from such a
From a fellow podcaster,
a renowned podcaster yourself. So, the COBT really takes a really broad look at the energy dialogues and just anything related to energy. We've had global population experts on. We've spent time talking to people about German coal. We've, anything in the energy world, or you think could possibly touch on the energy world. I'd like to think it's been somewhere in COBT at this point, or it's in the hopper right now. And so we use that platform in a way that Maynard describes, which I think is great, as a never-ending conference that you get once a week, right? So it's essentially good for us as the participants. It's good for the audience. We talk to people that we wouldn't normally have the chance to talk to. We engage, we learn more, and then maybe we take things back to our partners, or we introduce people, and things happen in the future that way too. So it's a really unique sort of multi-pronged organization, and it allows us to do really unique and different things. On top of COBT, we have another podcast, Generate, which I host alongside our COO, Jeff Tillery. It's a little bit more infrequently released because we like to put it out when we find real, useful things to share with our audience. And it's more focused on nuclear and electricity and industrial decarbonization directly versus the more broad focus of COBT. And like you said before, we throw parties, we keep our network connected. Veriton is all about getting together the right people in the right places and at the right time. And we think the right time is mostly now to be thinking about the future of energy. Veriton means truth in energy.
Yeah. And that's Latin or Greek or?
Yep. Yeah. Latin, truth and energy in Latin.
And energy. Very cool. Very cool. Okay. Fantastic overview of the business. I like Generate podcast also. You guys have had some stellar guests on that, and you do a great job hosting that show, asking very intelligent questions. So if listeners can't get enough of this topic, then those are two easy ones to add to the subscribe list. So shameless plug for you guys over there.
We'll send you the check. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much. So.
No check needed. Just keep inviting me to your Christmas parties. Yeah.
Done.
The other one, the super spiked, or the Argens, which we've
Right.
already
I
had our
should.
on the
I.
show. Yeah, yeah.
I'm
Uh,
neglectful in not mentioning Arjun's content. Arjun's content is
well, we've already had them on the show, so listeners should already know, right? Yeah.
okay. Good. I knew that. No, I'm just kidding.
If they're up to speed. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
Arjun's fantastic. Arjun's content is great. Arjun's content is also really great for somebody like me who, you know, doesn't have like this macro energy world experience and hasn't spent a lot of time thinking about that, or spent a lot of time in this isolated micro business, right? And everything. So even for nuclear people, there's so much you can learn. It's like drinking from the fire hose. And a lot of times I have to send notes to Arjun and my bosses and be like, all right, can you help the dumb kid out in class? What did this mean? Were you talking about? What was I not getting? And they're like, no, this is a phone call. We got to explain this to you. So,
yeah, yeah. One of our team members had a question about engagement and thoughts on renewables or energy technologies kind of outside of nuclear. Do you have a broad view of how these compare? And
yeah.
just as I'm reading this kind of question, I mean, some of your portfolio, I don't know how many of your portfolio companies are public, but I got a bit of a feel. I think I met a couple of them when I was in Houston, and that might be an example. But yeah, I guess just kind of more broadly, how do they compare? How does it compare to some of the work that you do with oil and gas companies?
Sure. We're across the board. We're technology neutral. We support anything that makes sense. I should say we're smart technology neutral. A couple of our investments
Profitable.
were
Good
profitable.
chance.
Yeah.
Focused technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that point that you touched on, right there, profit, in many ways becomes the differentiator a lot of times between a nuclear and even say a renewable investment that might on the outside seem as challenging as a nuclear investment. We've invested in some commercial wind technology, rooftop wind micro scale, as well as micro scale hydropower technology. And before I sort of interacted with both of those companies, when we started talking about it and they asked me to participate, I was like, oh my God, why? What am I doing here? Right. And like, how could this be smart? And then we listened to the founders and we listened to the story they were telling, and we ran through their financials, and we sent people out to their sites to look at their technology and touch real things. And I was like, why are these better stories than all the stories that I'm hearing from the nuclear people? And so that becomes a little challenging to then think about when you have, tons of your close friends and people I went to college with and people I adore and love and respect doing startups and leading these things. And they found out we have funds and they want to engage and have conversations, and we talk to them. And then I talked to my partners and they're like, yeah, that was good. I'm glad we gave them one call. We learned about it. Who gets to let them down? And I'm like, hopefully not me. Hopefully that's not me. Right. It creates a challenge. And, these things that I've talked about, that I've mentioned that we've invested in renewables wise, micro hydro, commercial wind, rooftop wind, somebody like maybe they won't work, but they still came to us and they had stories that were tied in with like manageable capital needs, manageable timelines to deployment or already in deployment, and like real, like transparent, auditable and things that you can check with potential customers that have already, like, real financials. And so those sort of dynamics, and I mean, I'm not trying, many nuclear companies have portions of these or all two of these or three of the, But then when you try to put it all together, or you're asking for all of it, which is just sometimes what our investment picture needs, maybe it's not what other investment pictures need, but it's for us sometimes, it becomes very challenging. So I'd love to say that nuclear companies are the most investable thing on the planet out there, and that it's gangbusters at Veriton, and where the doors are swung open, and basically anybody with the halfway decent story gets dollars. But that's not the world, and that shouldn't be the world. And we need the really good, tough, innovative stories and innovative thinking in order to make real change here. And hopefully one of those comes through my door, because I'd love to give them money, right? So, but I'm sorry that I haven't heard that in its entirety yet, and I hope I hear it soon.
Yeah. So having, I guess the lesson there is having the full story, miniaturizing capital needs, making it tolerable, and having real tangible evidence, right? With like supportable financials that people can point to and tell a competent story.
Well, I mean, there's lots of different ways to think about it. There's companies that fund development of real expensive things by making revenue elsewhere, right? There's lots of different ways to do it. But what you can't be doing is coming into a bunch of places that have money and being like, hi, the government, US is pledging with other nations to triple nuclear, and, climate change is important. And, all of these things are true. All of these things are true. But the person you're talking to with money would not have even opened the door to you if they didn't already know these things, right? So why are you different? Why is your story different? Where do you become something where any sort of investor can look and say, yeah, this is not money being thrown on a flyer, and that I'm going to get my money back in some, sort of way and everything. I imagine, X Energy had some answers for Amazon around that, right? And everything. I imagine Oklo investors, pre their SPAC, Oklo had some answers for them. Probably the answers were the SPAC, right? And everything. So that's that, but that worked for people, right? And for a lot of other folks, it doesn't, and I mean, we could have potentially, probably invested in the in the Oklo SPAC if we had wanted to, but that our fund is also about, having our money be, supportive and make real change, and where we could be helpful and all that sort of stuff and everything. And if they were in the pipeline and the way it's gone and the way their stock has performed, in retrospect, they didn't really need it, right? And they didn't need it from us because things seem like it's going okay for them. We'll see if they continue to go that way. What they need costs a lot of tons and tons and tons of dollars and a lot of money, but they say they've got that now, right? So rip, rock and roll, but that then creates the other questions, like who and where, and did everybody on the planet, when, before the Oklo SPAC, 6, 8, 9 months before the Oklo SPAC, did they think, and were they writing down that it would be mid-January 2025 and Oklo stock would be 26, 25, 5 times, or excuse me, 2.5 times its opening SPAC price? I'm not sure that a lot of people were predicting that. So these are things
I
to be
didn't make
thinking
that, and I wish I would have. Right. So, Brett, you're very intelligent about kind of all of these different nuclear technologies. You're really well versed on it, and I mean, it's your job, right? It's your job to be smart about these things. But how have you stayed up to date on a lot of these things? And I mean, I guess you kind of take these questions in one of two ways. It's either well, tell people how to inform themselves or convince people that it's just overwhelming and they should just call you and hire you to be their specialist and go-to guy. So,
Well, always hire Veriton. That's the best way to do it, right? Hiring Veriton is always the best way to do it. But no, maybe the answer is to you, like you said, to open this because it's Friday night and we're doing a podcast for an hour so far, and we're probably going to be going strong for a little bit, for a bit longer here and everything. It 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 takes a lot. I mean, like, this is in a lot of ways my life and my focus. I apologize to your
passionate.
viewers.
You
Well,
love it.
I am passionate about it. I apologize to your viewers that the two bums who have, entered in during our viewing and everything like that. But I live alone with my two
Oh, there's
dogs.
dogs in the background. And for those that are
Right. Yeah.
just in the
They
background,
should. They're.
Brett's
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I called them bums. For our listeners, right? They.
it's not
They don't,
actual. Yeah, there's
they're not actual bums, right? Yeah. They just
That's
don't have jobs, right? Yeah, they're dogs, but they don't have jobs. And so I live alone with my two dogs and everything. As I mentioned earlier, my twin brother has unfortunately passed away. I lost my mom about 11 months before we lost him, and we lost her to cancer. So my, immediate family has, shrunk down quite a bit since then. I love my family. I see them when I can and as much as I can. And but otherwise, I spend a lot of time trying to keep myself up to date, reading things about nuclear, hearing about things, and, reaching up and down my network to try and understand that better, and connecting with folks, and people do the same thing with me, and then I'm able to ask follow up and learn more and everything. So, I think the best way to answer your question is to say it takes a lot, just blanket statement. And then the other way to answer your question would be to say that, if people wanted to kind of gain more of this knowledge and do this more, it's really about having these, not, I hate to say it, because I think in some of the, when we were shooting back and forth about what this podcast might be about, I think in one of the questions somewhere, the word, cynic might have been mentioned somewhere, and something, and maybe we'll get to that. And I'm sorry if I took that, if I'm taking that out of turn and everything, but I think that there's a lot of hype and there's a lot of great feelings and joy and advocacy in the nuclear and in the energy space more broadly. And it's really important to be a pragmatic, practical, informed speaker. Makes me informed listener, speaker, and learner. And so those, like, a lot of the dialogues we often hear around nuclear, fundamental things around, people that say, we would build 1 million nuclear power plants, but for the NRC, oh goodness, all of these different, things that we hear and whatnot that may be, unless you are really just willing to drink the Kool-Aid in any other discussion anywhere for any other technology, for anything, you'd be like, oh, so we'd be on Mars, but for NASA is what you're saying, right? So to me, in a lot of that, I'm like, I'm not the most informed person about, going to space and Mars. I love it, spaceman Norman Rockwell behind me, right? And everything. But I know that there's a lot of science and technology and things left to do before we get to Mars, and work to be done. And, maybe Elon will launch this year, next year, whatever the hell it is. But Elon had to do so much, right? In order to get where they are today and everything. So, I just tell people that it is really easy to hear stories around nuclear and hear dialogues and repeat them. It is really hard to research those dialogues and claims and understand them better. And that's why I have a job, right? And everything. So I really recommend, taking your time, trying to find, a rational spectrum of experts to kind of pay attention to. Either that or just me. Only me would work too, right? I'm just, no, no. A rational spectrum of experts to look at, and then to read the things they share and say, I don't like to use advocacy without providing sources. I think, Mark, I shared with you the nuclear regulatory paper that we put out at Veriton recently. I think that was a 12-page paper, and 4 pages of it were references in like 8-point font, right? And everything. I don't want you to trust me because of I'm saying it. I want you to trust me because I gave you something to go back and look at so that you could come to a conclusion yourself, whether or not what I was saying was true or not. And I think we struggle sometimes with that in the nuclear dialogues and the nuclear world of things.
I think that was a phenomenal answer. I love that answer, Brett. It does a couple things. First, I just want to highlight how impressive your network is and your ability to, I'll say, connect with professionals throughout the industry. And, there is a lot of hype currently. And I think that, people need hope to invest and go and try new things, right? And it takes courage and it takes guts and then hopefully also a lot of intelligence and hard work that go behind it too, for these projects to be successful. But I think your view of, well, you've actually done real stuff in the nuclear industry, like you said at the beginning of the episode, and worked on projects that were hard, but they offered autonomy and purpose and forced you to be creative. And then you've come into this other energy space where you get to vet new companies and kind of get exposure to the whole traditional upstream, midstream, downstream oil and gas industry, which does real projects all the time. And so, yeah, I think you did say the word cynic, and yeah, that wasn't one of our questions. What does a cynic bring to the industry? But I think it's more, you're trying to be pragmatic about it and identify the real gaps that might be present and say, where is the hype train end and where do we actually need to focus our energy? And my dad had a great question that resonates with me a lot. It's look for what's missing in the current environment. And I think a lot of your work and your analysis and take on the industry can be cynical, but also is pragmatic in helping to identify what's actually missing. And I commend that. I think it's awesome. I think it's excellent.
Well, I appreciate Mark. You're way too kind to me and everything. The check is already coming. No, I'm just kidding. But
Be clear that you're not paying me to say any of these things.
I'm not paying. I'm not paying anyone. I don't have any check. I don't have a checkbook anymore. No, I'm just kidding. I think one of the things that I always like to think about with my life is my life has always been a pursuit for the middle ground, right? I'm the middle child, right? And everything. When I was working at a vendor, when I would do my reloads, I used to have to say all the time, a good compromise is when everybody leaves the table unhappy because everybody had to give something up. And like I had, my reload team carved it in wood, before I was leaving and everything. And I broke it one day in anger and smashed it, like at a next job and everything, and which I regret now many, many years later and whatnot. But, that was as I was, moving away from the middle ground, right? And everything. That was even what led me to Clean Air Task Force, because Clean Air Task Force is a little bit of a left of center organization. I'm a little bit of a right of center guy. And I was hopeful that moving together and getting, to CATF, we would come in the middle somewhere. But, maybe working with them for 5 years, I just got moved to the left a little myself. Who knows? I don't know, right? And everything. But I think that a lot of this is about the middle ground in a lot of these discussions, because people don't recognize that, you know, these dialogues around nuclear, or, you know, building large, building small, you know, building more, outside of the other side, which is just build less, all of these dialogues are so new and so young and have so little, you know, in many ways, factual basis behind it, right? Like I'm a scientist, I'm a statistician in a lot of cases. And a lot of things I look at, I'm like, where are my 30 cases? I can't even find 30 cases to look at to make a statistically, you know, useful
Do
sample
a P
here.
test or a T test. Yeah.
Right. You do any, no, just to say that this was statistically useful sample size, right? Um, you know, it's challenging then to sit there and say, you know, well, I got all these people out here saying one thing, you know, the world is dumb. Everybody should be building nuclear as fast as possible. Build large reactors, you know, build small you know, like all, and it's not a concerted and straightforward dialogue. You can find people on the extreme and they're like, large reactors are great, small reactors are dumb. Small reactors are great, large reactors are dumb, right? You know, you can find it all on this extreme side here and everything.
I
And
just
then
want
the
to know
other
who you're
side,
impersonating, that voice.
I don't know who I was. I was definitely not trying to impersonate anybody. If I'm doing an impersonation, we'll know it for sure. But that was just my extreme nuclear advocate voice. Large nuclear reactors are good. You know, I'll do it a different way. No, and then the opposite side of that equation is all nuclear is dumb and no nuclear is good. And so you're telling me that that's it, right? That there's no middle ground where it's like, hey, good nuclear is good. You know, they're like, let's do it smart, right? Let's not do the dumb thing that the people are saying is dumb. And let's not be crazy about it either, right? There's not a place like that to exist? Because if there's not a place like that to exist, I have literally wasted my life, right? You know, so, but we'll see, you know, I'm hopeful that a place like that exists and that's where we end up. If I'm wrong, because I played the conservative game, and we end up in a place where it's like, yeah, one of the, you know, we're built, you know, we're 100% nuclear, you know, in 30 years, and everybody's got molten salt reactors in their backyard, and I'm digging thorium with my robots in my yard and everything, like, you know, whatever, like
Just the Enron egg, man.
Yeah,
That's
right.
it.
I saw there's another Enron egg came. The new video's wild. They have it like steaming. But it's funny how that is the microcosm in many ways of what we're talking about here, because like this is a joke focused energy company. It's kind of like a practical joke overall. And what is the first target like that they come out like mainstream for? Like, I mean, maybe other people, maybe they did other things, but I didn't see it. Maybe it didn't go as viral, or maybe it's just the world I live in everything like that. But the first thing they pick is nuclear microreactors, because there's hype. There's so much hype here, right? You know, and it can work. It can be good. We should be able to do this, but there is hype. There's this world of don't do it. There's this world of we have to do it, and you're dumb if you're not on the wagon and any of those things, and you're not ready to just throw your money into every nuclear company and everything like that. And I can't live in either of those worlds, right? I don't want to, and I just physically can't. It would make me sick. It would make, you know, all of those things, right? So yeah, middle ground, man, middle ground.
I like it. We had this question. I don't want to make you pick. I don't want to make you answer this one, but maybe the second part of it. But do you have a favorite technology or least favorite technology or developer and why? But I like the second part of this question. Like if you had to pick an amalgamation of accomplishments, like that you might highlight as being positive, or maybe missteps, like what would those look like? So maybe
Sure.
not catch all for, which group's doing best, which group's doing worse, but rather what are steps or things that folks have done that might be more likely to be successful, and then things that might have been, not as great of an investment.
My favorite reactors and reactor technologies are the reactors that people want to buy. Okay. Right.
Great answer. Yeah.
Right. Well, but that is important, because I think a lot of people are just really distracted by the fact that we have a lot of people that want to buy reactors right now, right? Like Google, Meta, all of these people want to buy the reactors. They're putting money in, they're doing things and everything, but they don't want to buy the reactors right now, right? And everything. They're waiting until the demand is really drastic, or it's any of these things, and then they will want to do it. So they're willing to be a part of the discussion, but they're not 100% there yet. So I don't care what your technology is. If somebody wants to buy it, you're my favorite, right? You are my favorite. By wants to buy it, that should be real. That's not necessarily an MOU or an LOI or any of these things. That's like a real business contract, whether it's not fixed price, whatever it is. That's a contract for purchase of something. Power purchase agreements are moving in that direction, but that takes a lot of risk out of the customer's sort of like association with the nuclear technology. And when we think about a lot of times we talk about technology in nuclear space, and a lot of times I hear about that. They come into my office all the time, leading with technology discussions, and I hear all the time. And essentially what I'm getting is technology solutions for business problems, when I need business solutions for business problems, right? There's lots of ways to do nuclear technology, lots of different ways. But I do not think I am going to reactor physics. I'm a reactor physicist. I'm not the best reactor physicist. I did it for several years. I like to think I'm pretty good, but I don't think I'm going to reactor physicist myself out of $10 billion of Vogel cost overruns, right? That's not what did it. So, I'm not so interested in the technologies. I'm interested in questions around the business and what they do and why they do things and how they're pursuing things. And if I can squint a little and open some books and find a way to say that this technology should work or can work or has worked before, anything like that, what more do I care if it's a high temperature gas reactor or molten salt or any of these things and everything like that? But yeah, that question does come into it at that point. Like, can it work? Will it work? Can their claims be validated? Right? Because that's the claims. I only look at the technology to really validate the claims, right? And the claims are the business plan. So make good claims, make a good business plan that's validatable. I don't care what your technology is, right? Now, talking about things like that are good, milestones, otherwise, all this sort of stuff. A lot of times this alphabet soup that we live in, as I was mentioning before, the MOUs, the LOIs, the PPAs of the world can get somewhat distracting. MOUs and LOIs don't necessarily mean that those companies are really, really deep skin in the game. It might give a little bit of exposure. It might, get you the opportunity to learn more from the customer perspective, get some support in some ways, but it's not direct investment. It's not direct purchasing or contracting. And so it's in a lot of ways a play to say, hey, we'll be there when you're ready. We want to buy your reactor. And so that's that's great. That's good. Start collecting those, get together and everything. I want to make the transition, and I want to help them, or I want to be there for the transition beyond that, for when we're saying, okay, I'm ready to invest, like Amazon did in X Energy. That's a good signal. Who knows where, that goes? X Energy got direct investment from Amazon. I believe it's $100 million in a $500 million round that's being anchored by Amazon, alongside Amazon pledging direct investment in the projects. One project in Washington with Energy Northwest, and another project where they haven't directly pledged the funding, but I'm assuming they're going to fund that project as well, because it was all the same sort of multi-party agreement being all presented with Dominion in Virginia, likely North Anna nuclear site. So, those things are super interesting. Investment is super interesting. One of the things, and we recently at Veriton wrote this paper on how to understand the nuclear regulatory environment and understand the milestones and what they mean, as well as recommendations for potential owners, developers, and Congress and the federal government for changes to our nuclear regulatory environment, recommendations for how to think about the environment. One of the things that we pointed out is that folks aren't really, or haven't really even used our regulatory pathways the way they were designed, or the way they were ever anticipated to be used. We're trying to use them for different things now, like certifying a design before you have even completed a single piece of construction of it, when those design certifications were originally sort of developed when the NRC was thinking about how you standardize and do repetitive deployments and duplicative deployments of plants, not necessarily how to lower the burden of a first of a kind deployment. And so we had a design certification for AP1000 before Vogtle project even started, multiple years before it. And that design certification was amended close to 200 times before Vogtle was finished. And so each amendment, because a design certification is a rule, which is in NRC parlance, that's like a law. That's, and changing law is hard. Physically, the design certification of the AP1000 and other design certifications is a law, like the law of the land, right? So if you're going to change it, it's going to require a lot of changes. So if you've got, it's going to require a lot of work, a rulemaking, all of this other stuff. So in hindsight, perhaps, if one were to ask Southern and Georgia Power and Westinghouse, maybe we shouldn't, do you guys feel like you maybe should use the other regulatory pathway, the older one for the first of a kind plants, rather than the newer one that, nobody had used before and everything, and was maybe in retrospect is more for a second or third deployment, or not even a second, maybe a third or fourth or fifth deployment? Maybe some people would say yes.
Actually go build something first and then certify that design. And if you wanted to then repeat it, right, and be like, oh, that worked out great. Like, now let's get it certified so we can put it elsewhere.
Right. But what people don't understand is that, the license, you got to license any nuclear technology. You got to license anything. The Boeing planes need licenses, right? And everything. Just, I shouldn't use Boeing as an example, because they were having some serious challenges recently. But, cars, need certification.
Maybe that is a good example. They're statistically, they're doing great. Like, I'll get on a Boeing any day of the week.
Right. I don't even look anymore, right? And people were for a while. I wasn't, and I was probably flying more than most people at that time.
Yeah.
A design certification is, what people don't understand is that the owner is the one who licenses the plant, right? When you build it. Sometimes some people don't understand this. And so that means that the owner, the utility usually, is taking on a lot of upfront risk to spend on licensing before the plant is even under construction or anything's going on or any of that stuff. So a lot of these, and the more money, the money you spend, just like money in our pocket is good. Any consumer, any investor, anything, money in your pocket is good. Money out of your pocket is bad. Money out of a utility's pocket, money out of your pocket earlier on is bad, is even worse, right? Money out of a utility's pocket early on is bad. Earlier on is even worse. So they struggle with that risk paradigm and the challenges there. How long will the licensing actually take? Will there be, a lot of, requests for additional information, and therefore will we, licensing costs spiral out of control? And so Westinghouse and others come forward saying, hey, we've done this design certification that removes the safety review portion out of your license. Fantastic. Let's do it. And so the license that they apply for becomes easier. But the challenge is easier than if they had done it without the design certification, right? And perhaps not easier if they had yet done different pathways, all that sort. But all that means is that they're then tied into that before they even start construction. So the previous pathway did a split sort of construction permit and then an operating license. So you could do, you could work for as-built conformance later on when you're getting your operation, your operating license and everything. But that also created a unintended incentive to proceed with the projects on as preliminary engineering information and data as possible, right? All I need to do to get a construction permit, get it done, start building the damn thing, and we'll clean everything up on the back end, right? And that's how you ended up with every nuclear power plant in this country, every built on average. We've never done good cost estimates or never delivered the plants on time, right? On average, cost estimates have been exceeded by 100%, and schedules have been exceeded by 100%. Even on the glorious 60 plants, 100 reactor fleet that we built in this country that everybody points to and is like, look, we did it before, we can do it again. And I'm like, I don't want to do that again. I want to do better than that.
Yeah. I like your phrase, business solutions to business problems. I remember when Brett Kugelmass started Last Energy, he posted on LinkedIn and said, the technology wasn't really the problem. The business plan was broken. So he was going to try and solve that. It's interesting to see companies like the nuclear company popping up that wants to use AP1000s that people will buy, or they have bought in the past, and take those to build. And then, your example of X Energy investing. What I thought was really interesting about that deal too is NGP, right? The traditional private equity, one of the big guys out of Dallas and Houston, that's funded, over 400 oil and gas portfolio companies, got in on that deal too, which I think is a pretty good proof point. What does this look like? I mean, it sounds like we don't need to really innovate on the technologies, but what would you innovate on? And what are some more examples of business problems that we have? I mean, it sounded like maybe project management that you just kind of identified, but what other business problems might we have that we can solve with other business solutions?
Well, Mark, I think that's the right question to be asking. And if I had answers to give you to satisfy that curiosity, I wouldn't be here because I'd be sitting on a pile of money building reactors somewhere, right? And everything.
I think I asked that exact same question previously, like offline, and you gave me the exact same answer. So.
Did I really? I'm sorry. I apologize.
Oh, I like it. You're consistent.
I guess I was about to say I'm consistent. So, I love Kugelmoss. We're old friends. Brett's Unite we have a secret, monthly meeting, right? So
Yeah, there's a couple
nuclear
more in the industry that I'm best friends with too. So
Oh, there you go. Yeah, right. Nuclear Brett's our monthly meeting. There's just two of us sitting in a room, right? So now I'm gonna get like 14 emails from Nuclear Brett's after this. And you're like, you forgot us.
I want to be in this club. How can we get into that?
There's no club. There's no club. The when you talk about development companies, whether it's the nuclear company, whatever it is, right here and everything, what are folks doing, right? You either got to come to, like, a lot of people sit and point to the existing license sites, AP1000 or otherwise, and they're just like, well, look, the utilities won't do anything, like, we just got to go in there, we'll just get them, we'll just start. And I'm like, what do you mean just we'll get them? And they're like, well, we'll just get. And I'm like, no. Explain that more, right? How do you get access to the site the utility owns? Like, well, they're not moving forward with the plant right now, so we'll move forward with the plant. And I'm like,
go on.
You're right. I was like, the utility which has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on a license for this site, which has then spent tens and hundreds of millions of dollars more over the course of the years since they've gotten the license to maintain the license and maintain the site and continue regulatory engagement with the state and other things. They don't care about those sites. They're not investing in their future. They're not there creating it in a place that is ready to go when they are ready to go, when they want to buy the reactor, right, and everything, instead of wanting to buy the reactor right now. Because I think every utility in the country wants to buy an AP1000 right now. But I don't. So unless you've got a secret sauce to go into a utility and tell them, hey, these are the ways I can alleviate your risk and make you want to buy an AP1000, okay? And that's probably some sort of secret sauce around project management, deployment, development, construction management, all that sort of stuff. And maybe groups are putting things like that together. But then also I see groups putting out, like, that call it, solicitations, where they're like, hey, if you have construction or supply chain experience and you want to support our activities to build, reactors, come, respond to the solicitation. And I'm like, so who's doing what already? What, I forget what, hi, I'm sorry. I forget what movie it is. Office Space. How could I forget? What would you say you do here? Right? And everything. What would you say you do here? Because I've never heard anybody say to me, we would build more nuclear power plants in this country, but for more layers, more companies involved in the process. If we just had more entities involved in the process, we would get this done, right? And everything. I've never heard that before, but maybe I'm just traveling in the wrong circles, right? And everything. So if you don't have a special sauce, then you need to go to the utilities and you need to tell them, I recognize that these sites are valuable and that what you've done is valuable. Here, I've got money. I'm bringing it. I want to invest in your site. I want to invest directly in the project, all that sort of stuff. And if you've got the money and you can do that, I would hope I'm not hearing about you, right? Why would you be publicizing all? I wouldn't. If it was me, I would just be at the utility with a check. Like being like, okay, here's my blank check. How much do I have to sign? When can we get started? Here's the people that I want to say again.
Just making it work, making it happen.
Yeah. Right. So I want to be wrong. I want to understand this world a little bit better here and everything. And I want this story to be real, but a lot of times I just don't get what they're saying.
So Brett, these nuclear developers, figuring out what their secret sauce is, if they bring the financing. Well, I like what you said about just kind of keeping their head down. And I'll make a comment. Some of the most effective people in industry that I've ever met are also some of the most invisible. meaning like they're wildly effective leaders internal to their teams, and they're readily available to their teams, but they're not very public. Have you seen similar
Well, I
examples?
think, yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, a lot of people talk about real company, big companies be like, why won't, you know, Exxon get into nuclear, right? And everything, or why won't folks do that? And then I say to them, and I'm like, Exxon has had a nuclear guy for like 20 years, right? They're like, what? And I was like, not just one, like multiple. Maybe they didn't spend their time doing nuclear all the time over all 20 years because Exxon wasn't always kind of thinking about it, right? But all of these, like, big companies thinking about nuclear is good for nuclear broadly. And, everybody is doing that. Do we think that, like Microsoft developed this agreement with TMI and Constellation out of nowhere? Absolutely not. For those of us that were paying attention, we know that there was a bunch of hiring that Microsoft was doing. Microsoft hired TVA people, all from Tennessee Valley Authority, and to be their nuclear leadership, or excuse me, their nuclear, kind of analysis and research team.
Internal consultants, research.
Yeah. And then for a while, people were like, well, what's Microsoft doing? They hired these people. What's going on? And then it comes out that they went for the lowest hanging fruit to get lots of nuclear in the easiest utility nuclear deal you could make. It's not an easy deal, and it's certainly not a low hanging fruit in comparison to like building a natural gas plant, right? And everything. But if you wanted nuclear in this country, what's more low risk than restarting a plant that Constellation invested a lot of money up front in to make it restartable when they were shutting it down? And so were people not paying attention when Microsoft was hiring TVA people and being like, whoa, why? I want them to buy small modular reactor company PQRS, 4 or whatever it is, right? And everything. And I'm like, no, they hired a bunch of utility people. Of course they were going to do a utility deal. So, and it is one of the biggest and most impactful nuclear and utility deals of last year. And it was really quiet until it wasn't, right? So these are things that we need to keep in mind when we think about nuclear and think about energy and otherwise, right? What's the old saying? Bad news is good news. No news is good news, and good news is bad news.
Yes, makes sense.
I'm dyslexic, so I had to think about that for a second. It was hard putting that together. I apologize.
I like it. I want to circle back to this point that we touched on about kind of collaboration in oil and gas versus nuclear industry, because I think like there's a balance between like public stories that come out and kind of access and information and like holding stuff close to the chest and what's important internal to each of these organizations, right? I mean, and like you go work for BP or Shell or any of the big majors, oil and gas companies, in all those employment agreements, they have language that you are totally screwed and your career will end if you tell anyone any secrets, and don't tell anyone any secrets. And then all these people go to these industry events and conferences and present and talk and share ideas and collaborate and trade business cards. And then everyone calls each other and says, hey, I've got a problem. How do you fix this problem? How would you fix this problem if you were me? And people collaborate and they get stuff done. I guess on the technology side in nuclear, I've seen a little bit. People can be really tight vested. They can hold stuff really tight to their vest. And I think an example.
Nothing to protect, but protecting it fiercely.
And an example that comes to mind is like Nick Tower, I think was on Decouple podcast and talked about.
Love the dude. One of my oldest and great and best nuclear buddies. Love Nick.
Yeah. And he's like, there's no spreadsheet for like how much fuel each reactor needs, right? And like there's no publicly available repository for each of these advanced reactors. And so like if you're doing the material balance of what does the fuel industry need to fuel all these guys, which people would need to make investment in, that's just right. You can see there's this huge data gap that's just completely missing, and people view it as proprietary for whatever reason. So anyway, that's kind of one anecdote that I'd like to point to. But how do we balance, Brett?
I was just going to say, you might say they say it's because it's proprietary, and that might be what they're saying to you. More likely, and in many cases, the answer is they have no clue.
It's touche.
We have an idea.
Yeah, we'll give you a range. What do you want it to be? Yeah,
right.
Yeah, I've got a different story for another time. But how do we balance these ideas then, right? Like the trade-off between collaboration and competition. And I mean, in my view, like nuclear should not be competing against nuclear. Nuclear is competing against natural gas.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense in a lot of worlds where it's mature technology, right? Wind turbine people don't. You go to a wind and renewable conference and everything. It's a very sort of different event. Lots of patting each other on the back, elbowing, all that sort of stuff. And nuclear conferences and meetings, they'll do that, but then you walk around the corner with one of the participants, or you catch them in the bathroom and they come up to you and they, pull out their knife and start stabbing them in the back, right? And everything. So, this whole thing is exactly the same sort of story that I was saying to you before around what Rita and I were talking about in our engagements with oil and gas companies as compared to, nuclear companies. When the pie is big enough, it's easy to share. And when it's easy to share, people are more willing to help each other, right? And everything. I can remember when growing up, my mom made, really great chicken cutlets, growing up. She'd make a giant mountain of chicken cutlets for dinner and everything like that. When it was just my brothers and I, plenty of chicken cutlets. Everybody sharing, everything's fine. Nobody got stabbed in the hand with forks going for the last chicken cutlet or any of that stuff. When somebody would bring home, little Donnie from school to join for dinner and everything like that, and the ratios were off and everything, there might be violence, like real violence over, like, you got one more chicken cutlet than me.
Lawsuit? No, we're fist fighting. Yeah.
No, it's somebody stabbed in the hand with a fork, right? Like, no, I'm not fist fighting. Like, there might be real violence. So, I mean, that is not dissimilar from the phenomenon that we're talking about right now. If you're fighting for slices of a tiny pie that you think might be your only way to survive, if I get pieces of those tiny pieces of the pie, yeah, you are going to be like, do you want to die? Do you want to meet me in the back? Like, let's, you carrying switchblades, you'll be doing whatever you can. If you come from a whole different sort of place where it's like, yeah, there's abundance, there's opportunity, we can share, everybody can succeed. Hey, I want my slice of the pie to be bigger than yours, but I can kind of do that without you seeing, right? And everything. And, or maybe, if I'm the one that goes and buys the pie to begin with, then I have an easier portion divvying it out to the sizes I want. They think about things differently than when you're fighting.
Or I bought a pallet of pies. Or
right.
Yeah, these are
right.
That's a great metaphor. Yeah.
Yeah, fighting over a pie versus fighting over a donut hole, right? And everything. So.
Yeah. So how do we make the pie bigger then? I mean, I see a need for maybe more capital investment and smart, like we said already, smarter project management.
Right. So I mean,
is the secret sauce. We don't know what the secret sauce is yet. But.
No, well, I think you're hitting on the right sort of thing. It's chicken or the egg. but it's, 14, there's 14 different pieces to that cycle, right? I don't know what, sort of loop would look that way, right? Maybe it's the rain cycle or something
Maybe
like
we'll have
that.
to we'll have to make a list of them and then have have you on
Well,
for more
no,
to dive into each of them, right? Yeah.
yeah, no, but more I mean in particular is that it's a harder thing to answer, right? And everything. If you're hungry, I can either kill the chickens or scramble the eggs, right? And everything. If the and who cares, chicken before the egg, right? And everything. But if it's the dialogue that we're talking about here, we have a lot more questions everywhere around every piece of the discussion. And so it becomes a real harder, question to answer, and a real harder place to even begin starting to look for an answer, because we, have so much more to do. So I don't know about you. I'm a big uh, do it yourselfer, and what, like I like to pretend like I know, how to repair my home and shit like that, whatever. And I often find that, I've lived in my house 11 years now. I'll often find that as I'm doing something and I find work I did 8, 9, 10 years ago or everything, I start taking it apart and I'm always like, oh my God, what a fucking idiot. Pardon my, what an idiot, like why did you do this? Like you have a book, you could have just read the book. So, and I didn't become much better because I started reading a lot more, or I went to like trades class or anything. Became better because I did it more. I had done that same thing 14 times since then. And so I had figured out a different way to do it, and how to run electrical better, or how to, do the plumbing, or how to do the right vent for, any of these different things. Right. So again, the only way that anything happens here is by doing. The only way we have anything get done is with money. The only way we get money is by having a decent story. The only way the way we get anything done is we need to create a story that we can act upon, right? And then there's your circle, right? And everything. So this is one of those things where it's like, hey, I don't even pretend to be the smartest person on the planet, right? I will say often I am not. I'm just lucky, and I have a unique and what I hope is somewhat a smart perspective. And the things you're talking about are like some of the big questions of our time, right? And everything. And if the answers are just like, oh, because Brett figured it out in his, little office in North Carolina and everything like that. That sounds to me like a million monkeys banging on a piano or banging on typewriters to write War and Peace, right? And everything. So I think that this is not going to be something where it's like, oh yeah, this guy just secretly figured out the secret sauce or did whatever. Maybe it will be some technology thing or whatever, some technology secret sauce, but it's not going to be a nuclear technology because we haven't built anything. And I don't know what you're talking about. So maybe it's like the construction robot technology. Maybe Japan's building, giant construction mecha robots or whatever. And that's the way we solve all these construction challenges. Or somebody figures out how to enslave giant space aliens to make them build our reactors for us, right? I don't know. Like those would be ways to cut down on construction costs though, right? And everything. They're not rational, they're not real, but they're ways. And I don't even hear things that are that much more real than that. Well, a lot of times what we're talking about. It's just like, yeah, the prices are going to be lower. Like, why? Like, because they will.
Trust us.
So, right. I'm like, thanks,
Great.
Obi-Wan. Yeah.
Well, I like your point about reps, right? One of the research analysts, well-respected guy that I like at Enverus, made this comment to me when I was in Houston last year. He said, we got so good at drilling shale wells because we had so many reps, and we get good at building facilities because we have lots of reps. And until nuclear can get lots of reps, I just don't see it. I don't see costs coming down. I don't see them getting better, and I don't see the pie getting better. So, and my takeaway, and how I like to think about the world is like the collaboration among technology designers, fuel providers, et cetera, like the whole industry is you get more reps. And if you can learn from other people that, got a shot on goal, and you don't have to spend the money to do that, and you can actually collaborate, then there's value there. So.
Yeah, and I agree. I mean, TerraPower has signed an agreement with GE to work together on fuel and some other aspects of their project and everything. I can only imagine that we'll hear more sort of relationships like that, hopefully in the future. These are challenges, and it's better not to relearn the lessons of the past every time we want to do something.
Yeah. You mentioned customers want to buy these reactors, but then Amazon kind of made a step and put their money where their mouth is, and Microsoft hired a research team. These are examples of kind of what customers can do. Would you agree? And if there are other industrial end users or potential customers, what else can they do? What should they emulate Amazon and Microsoft and be hiring their own teams and making investments in SMRs like this, or should they be thinking about something else?
Yeah, so I mean, Amazon is probably the furthest out there in terms of the things they're doing in the nuclear space, at least the public things they're doing. Nobody's put the real investment behind like they have in the data center sort of world, right? All the other announcements we've heard have been more PPAs and sort of speculative relationships. And so it's great to sort of see all of those activities, but we need it from elsewhere as well. There's a great company that we work with a lot called NOV, and they're an oil field services company, one of America's largest, one of the world's largest. They do real big billion-dollar engineering projects and manufacturing on a regular basis all the time. And in collaboration with their customers, because they have an existing power leasing and sales business, they have been looking at the nuclear opportunity for multiple years, to a point where they have now started a subsidiary company with former NOV people, new former NRC and nuclear people joining the company to think about becoming a customer to own and operate hundreds and perhaps microreactors for oil and gas field purposes, to sell the power or heat or electricity to their existing customer base. So when you think about that, they're still probably a few years off from the first reactor that they could buy from somebody rolling off of some factory, or being delivered. I don't know how these I hope it's a factory, but they're probably several years off from that. But they've been spending real dollars for 3 or 4 years at this point. They've hired people, they've created a subsidiary, they're getting into the game directly. And they're working with their customers to make that a reality. So it ties in with a lot of things that you said around collaboration, but it also highlights another thing, that is, this takes time. No matter what you're doing, no matter where it is, whether when you're actually pursuing the projects, or whether you're thinking about pursuing the projects, or when you're thinking about pursuing the projects, when you're thinking about developing a structure when you could pursue projects, right? All of that takes time. So I'm really hopeful for what they're doing, but I know that they need more time to cook, and they need to just hit some milestones and continue along on this climb that they're doing. And that hopefully, should they do that, maybe we can see some real change and real effectiveness, and something that would excite you, myself, probably a whole bunch of people all over the place, real large oil and gas companies adopting nuclear heat, electricity, or power to decarbonize and clean up their operations. That sounds like a great story to me.
No, I think the Shepherd Power story is awesome. That's the name of this series, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry if I didn't mention it. Yeah, Shepherd Power.
Yeah, great. I mean, great recommendation. It's like, hey, look at what those guys did. Great thing to emulate. And there's much opportunity in the space that other companies can still come in. And I think the more companies that take that approach, that my interpretation is there will be a direct impact at reducing the cost of building these nuclear systems, which will make it cheaper for everyone, which will give us more reps, which means it'll be more standardized, and yeah, we can build more of it. So,
well, Shepherd excites.
I love it.
Well, I was going to say Shepherd excites me. And I love it too. I think it's super exciting, and they excite me a lot, particularly because reactor developers and the nuclear industry is always saying we need real owners, we need to build an order book, all of those things, right? And here's a company that's saying, hey, I'm willing to be the owner and build that order book for you. You just have to be able to sell a story that I'm willing to buy. I want to buy your reactor.
Yeah, I love it. Brett, one of our team members had asked, what happens when you run into an anti-nuclear perspective? What if you find a hater?
I mean, I don't run into them much, but I mean, I run into them on social media. And a lot of people like to characterize me as not the kindest, I guess, on social media, or, maybe a bit of a jerk, or perhaps asshole would be the better sort of way to characterize it and everything. If you want to know what it's like when I'm trying to be mean and an asshole, find when an anti-nuclear person tries to engage with me. But then again, there's anti-nuclear folk out there that I do engage with sometimes, to just try and get perspectives and understand things. And I try to treat them with, respect if they treat me with respect and aren't just outright stupid. And I doubt he would call himself anti-nuclear, but he's anti-nuclear. Like Ed Lyman at the Union of Concerned Scientists and everything. Ed is always great a lot of times about responding to things I ask him, trying to gain a little bit more on his perspective and everything. But most of the time I agree with 97% of what he says and puts out there and everything. But he at least puts it out there with something, and he's trying to, so again, it's just what you say and how you say it. And, when you come in with really, really uninformed takes, anti-nuclear takes, which a lot of those anti-nuclear takes are really, really uninformed, don't expect me to really care what you have to say. And if I don't care, I'm not about to be super polite. So, I engage best in things I care about, and I engage worst in things I don't care about, and I don't care about uninformed.
Okay. We've now been going, I think, for almost 2 hours or over 2 hours, depending on how much this we might cut out. But Brett, leave us with kind of your most positive view of the future. What's the world going to be like in 5, 10, 20 years? And I know that you don't have a crystal ball, but maybe if paint a picture for us about where we're going and what it looks like.
I mean, as long as we don't shoot each other or, blow each other up or any of that, worse, which I don't want to, there's a lot of that, the world, at times in my life, it has been said that I lived in the safest time in history. I'm struggle I would have to go and see the statistics for it right now. I wish I could say just on the back of everything that we're living in the safest time in history, but people are dying from conflict at rates that I would prefer not, all of that sort of stuff. So as long as some of that can get resolved and cleaned up, knock on wood, we had a, ceasefire in Gaza and Israel, recently signed, maybe a war in Ukraine ending might be on the horizon. I would rather see, Russia, spent into oblivion, but, I'd also rather see people stop dying too. So I'm okay if we can, resolve things in a compromise where everybody's unhappy, right? And everything. But as long as we don't kill each other, all I know is that I feel like the conversation around energy, conversation around nuclear, any of these things has just become more and more rational over the last few years and over the last several, or the last decade or more. I still interact and I see a lot of advocates and talk to them a lot, nuclear advocates a lot, but, I tell them often, I'm like, you can get 10 million people to march on Washington for nuclear power wearing, pink cooling tower hats or something like that if you really wanted to. And a week later, no one will care and it won't matter, right? Because where's the product that somebody wants to buy, right? So I think that we are going to be moving into an era of nuclear products that people want. Now, how hard it's going to be to get there, or who is going to have to build a nuclear plant they don't want before that in order for it to become a nuclear plant that they eventually wanted or that somebody else wanted after them or any of that stuff. I don't know how many of those people or how many of those projects we're going to need and everything. I hope not a lot. But I think that things like we saw also this week, we're dating it again, I apologize, the announcement of this deal between Westinghouse and Korea Hydro and Nuclear Power and KEPCO around resolving export of APR 1400s because it was an intellectual property dispute between the companies. That paves the ground for, big projects to proceed. Reactors in Czechoslovakia, or excuse me, I'm sorry, not Czechoslovakia. Oh my God, I can't believe I just said it. The Czech Republic. Wow, that's terrible. The Czech Republic, and the opportunities here are really growing day by day by day by day. 2-3 years ago, if I did this podcast with you, I would not be like a weird or abnormal person to sit there and say, yeah, I don't see a lot of opportunities for new AP1000s in this country. And I don't think we're going to build an AP1000 in this country. 2-3 years removed from that in today's date, I think we're going to probably build another AP1000 in this country at some point. I sure hope so. And a lot of that really just came from people seeing Vogtle turn on and it being like, wow, okay, yeah, it's on. It may have been challenging and struggle, but that's a lot of power that Georgia Power just got. And, and there's another Vogtle that just turned on right now. That's even more power, right? So those things, like real things finishing, doing what we said we were going to do, even if we did it poorly, but doing what we said we were going to do, doing it good would be better, right? And everything. But if we do it poorly, I get it. But eventually we need to not do it poorly. And the only way to not do it poorly is to try or to just do it poorly a few times, right? So I think we're going to see some projects that are, up and down, things that we may not necessarily have wanted to go the way that we wanted them to go, but we're going to need to stick with it and figure out ways to deal with that. It probably shouldn't be, you know, blanket cost overrun insurance things and everything like that, because that doesn't create the best incentive to kind of, you know, do better. But, you know, that might be the only viable option. And if we can just get enough done where you still learn despite perhaps not doing the best job, then maybe we'll get somewhere. So I think, you know, it's 2025, right? You know, and everything. We're at the bottom half of this decade. You know, I really, really want to see and would like to see a commercial microreactor online and in operation in the next 5 years. I really don't think we're going to see in the United States. I really don't think we're going to see a commercial small modular reactor online in this country in the next 5 years. I think that'll be a post 2030 thing. And I'd really love to see an announcement of a new AP1000 project in the next 5 years or so. So I think what we want is some small wins, some real announcements, starting on real construction, and real regulatory engagement for those real projects, and then follow through. And then maybe, you know, set your clocks and everything, and maybe we visit back together on your podcast in 10 years. God, I hope not. I hope all our podcasts are done at 10 years. No, I'm just kidding. You know, I'm just kidding.
The
You know,
COBT episode or whatever, 3,000.
right? Yeah, the 10,000 COBT episode. Yeah. I hope, yeah, maybe we sit down and we say, yeah, you know, we had to do it. We had to get over the hump and everything like that. And once we got over the hump, we were able to actually prove this the way we wanted to. And that's what I hope the future is going to be about, right? Because if we don't do it, there's going to be plenty of other technologies that can fill gaps here and everything, whether it's, you know, less desirable, you know, collaborations of technologies, you know, making natural gas as expensive as nuclear or any of those things, right? You know, there's ways where nuclear can be left behind. So these dialogues everybody makes all the time where it has to be a part of the discussion. And I'm like, it should be a part of the discussion. It only has to be a part of the discussion if we stop screwing it up.
That's a great way to leave it, Brett. I think you ended up or provided fodder for, you know, 20 additional episodes with all the topics that you listed in the end there, and hot takes and good takes, and good recommendations for the industry. So this has been fantastic. I really appreciate the time and the insight. And yeah, thanks so much.
No, it's been my pleasure, Mark. It's always a pleasure. Hope to see you somewhere in person soon. And to all your listeners and viewers, you know, don't forget to check out Veriton, and we hope to see you all somewhere soon too.